is Trump setting the stage for it's time for us to walk away?
I understand there's a 15-point version of the same plan that currently hangs in the men's room of the Kremlin. And people visiting the men's room are being invited to add any additional points that they think are useful. So that's where I would put the 15, 28, 20, whatever the point plan that we've set forth probably belongs. President Putin was kind enough to meet with Witkoff and Kushner. And of course, after that 5-hour meeting, nothing really emerged. And I don't think anything is going to emerge. The Russians are in the driver's seat. They have militarily won this war. They're cleaning up the battlefield, frankly, at this point. You still have a few hundred Ukrainian troops down in Pokrovsk. There are other pockets of Ukrainians at various places. And they've been offered the opportunity to surrender, and I think they should. Maybe they will, but if they don't, they'll be annihilated. And then the Russians will consolidate what they've got, and then they will move forward. I think Odessa is very much on the agenda right now because Odessa is this open wound. We and others continue to funnel not just equipment, military equipment and ammunition and so forth into Odessa. I'm told we're also clandestinely pushing mercenaries into Odessa. And in fact, there are a lot of mercenary troops that are being captured right now on the battlefield in Ukraine. They're not finding very many Ukrainians anymore that want to fight, because to fight means almost certain death. So your best shot at this point is to take the money that you get out of the Three Stooges that met with Zelenskyy or from Washington and put it against mercenaries. And that's something the CIA, MI6, Mossad are very good at doing, and that's probably who's honchoing that operation. It's over. The end is here. So I think that's the first part. Second part is, first of all, I really tire of this word democracy, because we're not a democracy. We're a republic. We have democratic features and attributes, but we are preeminently a republic. So, by the way, is Ukraine. Our friend Zelenskyy has been the de facto Stalinist-style dictator of Ukraine now for a long time. And his argument, which is not unreasonable, by the way, is if he's going to pursue the open-ended extreme policies that he has to be a dictator. So it's interesting that President Trump now says this. So what we ought to do, and you guys have a great staff, you know how to do this, is go back and listen to what President Trump says over the last several years. And I remember him appearing in front of a rally back in, I guess this would have been 24, talking to one of the MAGA rallies and saying, how about that guy Zelenskyy? He's a really tough, courageous guy, isn't he? And he gets one of these, and ooh, you know, most Americans were smart enough at that point to figure out this is a scam. Look how long it's taken President Trump to finally come around to the truth. The whole thing is a scam. It never had any chance of success. It was an artificial construct hatched in Washington and London primarily, and to a lesser extent in Israel, to essentially harm Russia. What an utterly dumb and stupid idea. In the meantime, he neglects to point out we're at 38 trillion and counting. We're continuing to print. We can't really borrow very much anymore, Dan. Nobody wants to loan us much money. So we're just printing, quantitative easing over and over and over again, debasing the currency. So all of this has to be, all of these events and his comments on Zelenskyy, it all has to be viewed in that context.
And you know, Doug, it's funny, as you mentioned here, talk about our staff, because Gary's all over stuff. Apparently, he can be over stuff even before you say it, because it turns out that he found a soundbite from the past earlier today from somebody else who also said the same thing you just did, that this is just the West looking for a way to harm Russia.
Я думаю, що у всіх різні інтереси. Причому у всіх, у Заходу є ті, хто хоче, щоб ця війна йшла довго. Тому що це буде виснаження Росії, але ціною України, ціною життя людей. Це точно вигідно деяким країнам.
So that is I had forgotten about that one, but there he is. Absolutely, he could have just literally been quoting you from almost 4 years ago now. 1 month into the war, he knew what the West was doing, and yet he has made himself a willing vassal. What can you say about that?
Well, he's worth over $1 billion. He has cash in multiple accounts across Europe and probably the Caribbean and places elsewhere in the world. So I guess he's come to terms with his betrayal of the Ukrainian people and nation. You know, I've often said the man is not a Ukrainian, never was. He comes into this as a result of an oligarch, Zelenskyy, who is now in jail, and other influences in Washington, New York City, and Israel. And he had many opportunities to step up and say exactly that and point out that it was in Ukraine's interest to have peace. Now, people make excuses for Zelenskyy, Dan. They say, well, he's got these neo-Nazis there. Well, Kolomoisky, who put him into power effectively, has also funded all of these neo-Nazi organizations. By the way, Kolomoisky, like Zelenskyy, is Jewish. And these people are sporting Nazi symbols. They have funded these neo-Nazi organizations. I mean, they're clowns. Come on. Just because you put on a Nazi symbol from 80 years ago doesn't make you anything. But that sort of thing is what they love to sport, and it has been useful in terms of mobilizing Ukrainian hatred against Russia, because there are a lot of people there that still don't believe that Russia is any different from what it was 80 years ago. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It doesn't make any sense, but it's real. What President Trump needs to do is end this. Stop the flow of money and arms of any kind. Get us out. Get all of the intelligence operatives and agents, get all the military personnel out of Ukraine. Halt this nonsense. Everybody's been involved in this, from Cavoli and Supreme Commander Europe all the way down into the lowest possible level with captains and sergeants and special operations. Just get them out. Put an end to this. It's been an enormous failure. But I don't think he's going to do it.
It's hard to say. But there was, in addition to the soundbite we just showed you from Trump that was released this morning that I guess he made yesterday, on Monday in Doha, Don Jr. went forth and was asked a very pointed question, which harkens back to what you said back in January.
And obviously, Ukraine has a massive corruption issue, and as you say,
it was a far more corrupt country than Russia, as delegated by the United States government prior to this war. But then, because of the war, and because he's one of the great marketers of all time, Zelenskyy became a borderline deity, especially to the left, where he could do no wrong. He was beyond reproach. Years of corruption, years of graft and theft on a world stage that everyone in this room knew was happening, was totally absolved. And it's ridiculous. We're not dealing in reality.
But is your hunch that President Trump is going to walk away?
I think he may. What's good about my father and what's unique about my father is you don't know what he's going to do. The fact that he's not predictable, he's not following the playbook of every clown who's, again, been a bureaucrat for decades, you don't know.
So now you could read that one of two ways, Doug. You could, because when she asked the question, will he walk away, uncharacteristically, he paused. So that means he didn't want to just give the answer he knew was right away. He said maybe, and then he goes into this, well, you don't know what he's going to do. So that could mean that the answer is yes, he's going to walk away, but I don't want to say it. But it could also mean no, he's not going to walk away, and I don't want to say that. How do you interpret it?
Well, we've contributed enormously to the corruption in Ukraine. Let's be frank. And as was pointed out earlier, the numbers of people inside the Washington Beltway, the financial interests that supported President Trump for re-election or for election, especially the major billionaire donors, all have stake or stakes in what's been going on in Ukraine. I think that has had an impact on President Trump and slowed his readiness or willingness to walk away. But let's go back to some realities. Having talked to President Trump on a couple of occasions, and this particular subject came up, and I'm talking about NATO and Germany and so forth. This is a man who has always understood from the beginning, we need to get out of Europe. We need to cut our losses in this whole campaign and get out. He understands that. He understands that our relationship with Russia, with Moscow, is far, far more important than anything happening in Kiev. He understands those things. But he's one of these people who can entertain two diametrically opposed opinions at the same time in his mind. This is not someone, contrary to popular belief, who's very decisive. Well, why would he be? He doesn't know anything about that region of the world. And the people that he surrounded himself with aren't going to help him because they're all there to ensure he stays. You know, why send Witkoff and Kushner to talk to President Putin? Why? They have no authority. They have no credentials. They're just friends of the president. You know, why not send Secretary of State Rubio? Well, I think we know why. Because Rubio is dedicated to the proposition that this must go on, that whatever harms Russia is good. This is a card-carrying neocon. Witkoff and Kushner may be friends, but they're just interested in making money. So there's no great stake in these other matters. But the Secretary of State, that's a different matter entirely. And look at the people that he wants around the president. They're bad news. These are people that will keep us embroiled and immersed in conflict and war with everybody on the planet for decades. So the president not only is entertaining two diametrically opposed opinions in his mind at the same time, he's surrounded for the most part, even in his inner circle, with people who are absolutely disastrous for the United States, disastrous for the cause of peace, disastrous for the survival of our country and its economy. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I mean, listening to President Trump, and I like President Trump. I think he's a good human being, and I think he has good intentions. I don't think he's mean-spirited at all. And I think when he talks, he's being honest. But the problem is that's not enough. You have to move away from this confusion and put your money on what you really believe and think. And I think he's close to it. And I think that's what Don Jr. was trying to get to. But he's not there yet.
It doesn't appear he's yet. And unfortunately, fueling this idea that there is diametrically opposed ideas swirling around the mind of the president, that apparently also extends to the United States ambassador to NATO, Ambassador Whitaker.
Don Jr.'s right. There may get to a point where if President Trump determines there's not a deal to be had, that he does step away from it. And that certainly, would be his nature. He does like having strategic ambiguity to be able to insert where he needs to insert. And he is expecting both sides to make progress. This war needs to end. He has been very clear about that. And the killing needs to stop. President Trump is the only one that can bring both sides to the table and work with them to mediate a resolution. There is no one else that can do it. If the United States walks away, if President Trump walks away, the likelihood of peace dramatically diminishes. And so, President Trump knows that, and obviously he's in a perfect position to resolve this, but it's going to take both sides. And if he determines that both sides are not serious about peace, he'll have to take that into his calculation. But ultimately, President Trump is the peacemaker in chief.
Okay, wait. Either you're the peacemaker in chief and you know how to bring these disparate parties together as a mediator, even though that we're a party to this, or then if it can't, we're going to walk away. But those things can't go together, yet they are trying to in his mind.
Well, Matt Whitaker is a good man, and he's becoming more politically astute. He's managed to be on every side of every issue all the time, which is a great achievement for any ambassador. Look, you're exactly right. This business of strategic ambiguity is nonsense. Strategic ambiguity gets you into wars. We need to be very unambiguous about what we want and what we don't want. We've had too many people in Washington for too many years who thought they could be cute and confuse the enemy. That's nonsense. We're confused. The opponent is not. Right now in Ukraine, we need to get out. That's the only answer. That's the decisive move that will spell the end of the Zelenskyy regime. And if people in Washington want to stand on their desks and say, "Oh, you're surrendering to Russia, you give it up, you're betraying Ukraine," the hell with them. They don't know what they're talking about. They're repeating talking points that have been written for them by the staff. The staff is responding to the donors. This is not about that. This is about the United States of America and its strategic interests. We have no strategic interest in this war in eastern Ukraine other than to promote peace and stability. The only way to promote peace and stability is to permanently stop any more support to this criminal, corrupt regime that Don Jr. accurately characterized. That's what needs to happen. That's what the president needs to do. Eventually, he'll do it. Sometimes I think President Trump embodies that most American of characters. Churchill said the Americans will always do the right thing after they've tried everything else. I think President Trump will do the right thing. I just wish he'd done this years ago. Certainly done it immediately after being inaugurated instead of waiting this long. Nothing has improved. Everything's gotten worse. It's a drag on us. It's a drag on him. He needs to cut his losses and get out.
You know, one last sound back from that interview that President Trump gave to Politico that was released this morning, I thought was instructive. Not so much in what he's thinking of to get out of it, but really in the challenge he has to actually act on this. And so in light of Zelensky, I mean, let's go back to the February debacle in the Oval Office, all the things that Trump has tried to get done, and Zelensky keeps saying no. In light of all that, this is as strong as it is as of this morning.
Is Zelensky responsible for the stalled progress, or what's going on there?
Well, he's got to read the proposal. He hasn't read it
the most
yet.
recent draft.
That's as of yesterday. And maybe he's read it over the night. It would be nice if he would read it. You know, a lot of people are dying, so it would be really good if he'd read it. His people loved the proposal. They really liked it. His lieutenants, his top people, they liked it. But they said he hasn't read it yet. I think he should find time to read it.
I think he should find time to Doug, this is the president of the United States. This is the guy who famously has this furious anger that he can blow up on people. Why is he playing with kid gloves with Zelensky instead of reading the riot act as you suggest?
Well, it goes back to how thoroughly does he understand the situation. And he says many of the right things, but when it comes to make the decision, he doesn't do it. He is much more of a political animal than I think the people who voted for him thought at the time. People wanted to believe that he was the tough-minded businessman who was making things happen and crushing his opponents. It's not true. I don't think it ever was true. As I've always said, if anything, he is too nice. He's actually a very nice human being, and I think that's one of his weaknesses. So, you know, at the end of the day, none of it matters. It's over. History will record that Joe Biden was the de facto destroyer of NATO. I don't think that'll be pinned on Trump, although the left and their friends will do everything in their power to do that. But I think it will be remembered that it was Joe Biden that committed not just the United States and its closest allies, but the entire NATO alliance to this nonsense. And he will go down in history as not only having destroyed NATO, but having destroyed the Ukrainian nation. I don't know that there's going to be much left. We're going to end up with a rump Ukraine. Odessa will fall into Russian hands, and then there'll be a recognition that what remains is really the historic Ukraine, which is this territory from Poland that reaches to the Dnieper and a little bit beyond, but all in a long strip in the northern part of what is today the Ukrainian state, at least on paper. It's very sad, but I think that's where we're headed, and I wish that President Trump would move with all possible speed to terminate this whole thing. But he's got too many people around him telling him not to do that.